Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're listening in from. My name is Lydia Winnie. I am the legal manager at AvocAid Sierra Leone, and we are very honored to be part of this discussion. Today, as I speak about the impact of COVID on women and girls in detention, we know that COVID has had, without a doubt, a disproportionate effect on all women and girls in our community and all the vulnerable. And the pandemic has exposed and exploited all inequalities of its kind. And though these restrictions were essential and a necessary trade-off between rights protection and a balance to ensure public health, our calls to the government have emphasized that human rights inform decisions that governments puts in place to ensure these prevention regulations. For Sierra Leone, various measures were put in place. Specifically, there was a state of emergency, there was curfews, there was restricted air travel, inter-district travel, lockdowns, restricted working hours. But for the purpose of this discussion, court suspensions, as well as the restricted access for women in detention, except for those who only could access a lawyer, which of course was in itself an irony and undermining rule of law and fair trial rights, looking at the fact that some of these women, and most of them anyway, are unable to afford the services of a lawyer. They are unable to afford services legal to post bail. So we realized that these all proved counterproductive, especially that they increased detention, overcrowding in detention as people were put back in detention. People who could have been granted bail were not granted bail. There were no discharges. There were no suspended sentences, all affecting fair trial rights and undermining the rule of law. Not forgetting the fact that also, of course, for the prevention measures that were put in place, most people were being affected and coming more into contact with them for breaching these prevention regulations that were put in place, and meaning that more people were coming into detention, yet having no access to courts of law. AvocAid, with the support, of course, of various donors, specifically for the UN ODC and UN Women, were able to receive grants to be able to support and continue to offer our services to some of these women, despite the fact that we did not have access. We had to adopt our ways for the social support, for the legal support, specifically that our paralegals and social workers monitor these places of detention on a daily basis. So it was a challenge for us not to access our clients. However, we devised ways. For example, we developed forms that we used to use and give to the correctional officers to be able to fill it out for us, depending on the legal need or the social need that a particular woman in detention might have, which then would be passed on to the duty council to be able to offer the services, since they were the only ones who had access. However, we continued also to monitor and offer some of the services using mobile phones, so that we kept in touch with our clients, especially that some of them would have members that needed to be informed of their arrest that happened suddenly for breach of maybe curfew, and nobody knew where they were. So our social workers and paralegals could continue to do family tracing, even despite the fact that they didn't have access to the women in detention physically. And looking at this, of course, that we relied a lot heavily on the relationship that we have with the Sierra Leone Correctional Service, the Sierra Leone Police, and it enabled us to have discussions with them on best ways how we can intervene for the women that we work with, and for the police specifically, discussions on not bringing in issues of custody sentences, not keeping people in detention, not only for the risk of the outbreak of the virus, but also as a measure that could be in turn used even way after the pandemic. Is it really necessary to detain people, or can we use alternatives not to detain people? In which I know through the monitoring, we have seen fewer cases of people being in detention cells at police stations. Looking at the issue of going beyond the pandemic, of course, and realizing that the services that we can offer are beyond our resources, are beyond our means, because this is happening all over the country. we thought of legal empowerment as a strategy to ensure that people are able to know their rights and can be able to claim them. And under this grant from UNODC, UN Women, we were able to craft what we call Know Your Rights series, where people had information given out on social media, and this had been redesigned to suit the local person that can be easily understood and translated in different ways on radios and TVs for people to be able to know what are their rights. Should they be arrested? Where should they go when they are arrested? Or who can they actually call to be able to come to their rescue? And also we looked at the engaging government. They of course make the prevention guidelines, they put in place systems. And so we're looking at the challenges we're facing, discriminatory fines that were affecting people who are not wearing masks. For example, AvocAid was requested by NACOVA, which is the governing body that is managing the outbreak of the COVID virus in Sierra Leone, to come up with guidelines to ensure compliance using a public health approach, not a criminal approach, so that people are not put into detention, or there are other ways that someone can be able to, not that we condone not wearing face masks, but not having to put people in detention over face masks, especially for those who fail to pay for their fines. AvocAid also was invited to participate in the national assessment of the correctional centers by the Ministry of Internal Affairs to do a whole prison audit, which was a privilege for us because it was then for us to ensure that the questionnaires we put in place, to ensure that the recommendations we make all are human rights informed and promote human rights law, and also that they are specifically gender responsive mechanisms, systems that are put in place, not only for dealing with a pandemic, but even after. AvocAid was also able to draft policy briefs that were sent to the Office of the President during December time, because we hoped for a release that usually happens annually every December, but specifically relating it to COVID and the prevention of the outbreak of the virus in prison. And we sent that out. Much as some people were released, we think that was also our calls to government assisted in doing that. And AvocAid also engaged those who were actually formerly incarcerated during that time, and with startup grants, involving them in radio talk shows, involving them in TV stations, but mainly having a workshop for them to hear from them. When you were incarcerated, what was it that we could have done for you, especially that we didn't have access to you, that could have helped you? What was happening for others that may not have happened to you that you think AvocAid can be able to pick up? And then we've had very good recommendations. We've had very good practices that have told us about, and we hope that that can be adopted and assimilated in our work to be continuously used, not just during this time, but post the pandemic. Especially our phone calls, especially our forms that we use, they found it very good. AvocAid also realizing that we cannot work only alone, but in a network and partnership, especially that we cannot be in every area of the country. We had meetings with civil society to create a platform for discussion and a network and for partnership that can be able to be used as a way of having interventions, creating initiatives for situations as these, but also for the future, so that we are able to have people access justice, people have their rights claimed for not only this time, but just for general penal reform. So we know that all this has not just been without a challenge, and AvocAid finds itself in a situation where it continuously has to adopt and adapt its working interventions to ensure that women and girls are still, the rights are promoted, and anyone who comes in contact with the law anyway. We will continue to work with anyone who wants to work with us, who's willing to work and partner with us, and because I know we all play a vital role in ensuring that all these measures that we put in place, all the measures that are put in place by our governing states are necessary, they are proportionate, they are non-discriminatory and in compliance with national, regional, and international standards. I thank you for listening.